This week we're concluding our 3 week journey into the second story of creation. The first cornerstone was humanity is finite, God is infinite. The second is that the desire for sexual intimacy is good without shame. But there's more to the story than that, because in our journey with the second story of creation, we conclude with one of the most far-reaching cornerstones in all of the 11 chapters of Genesis, first 11 chapters of Genesis. Probably the most far-reaching for the Judeo-Christian social order. And so the story continues after male and female, Ish and Esau, were created. So the story continues in chapter 3. We're familiar with the story, but let's read it to have it clearly in our minds. First of all, chapter 3, 1 through 7. Now the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you should not eat of the tree of the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "Oh, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said you shall not eat of the tree of in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, or you're going to die." But the serpent said to the woman, "Oh, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made for themselves aprons. And then we move to chapter 14. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you've done this, cursed are you above all cattle and above all wild animals. Upon your belly you shall go, and the dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your pain and childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he will rule over you." And Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground between you, and toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, your dust, and the dust you will return." Well, a fairly riveting story. It's been the source of many books in our modern age. Many films is around this theme. This story was undoubtedly embellished in a lot of ways around the campfire. We can imagine the prompting questions that might have prompted the telling of the story of the fall of humankind. The question might have been, why is the beauty of childbirth so painful? Or why do people wear clothes? Or why are snakes the enemies of humans? Or why do men have to work so hard? Whatever the question, the story of the fall of humanity was told over and over and over in many different ways. You know, the prophet Amos picked up the theme of this in his message to the Israelites. The blame game is over. You must suffer the consequences of your own behavior. Jesus taught that when we miss the mark of God's high calling of agape, there are consequences of being separated from one another and separated from God. The whole social order of the Judeo-Christian culture has always incorporated this understanding in order to maintain law and order. There are consequences of your behavior. Responsible parenting has always included the teaching that whatever a child does, there are consequences and you have no one to blame but yourself. Ever heard that before? You know, one definition of maturity has been that maturity requires that a person considers the consequences of an action or decision before they act or before they decide. That's what maturity is, considering the consequences before you act or decide. Now, the snake said God was just protecting God's turf by preventing humankind in becoming all-knowing just like God. The woman tried to hide the truth that she ate the fruit because it was so doggone tasty by blaming the snake for her action. And Ish blamed Esau for giving him the tasty fruit. Yes, the story is intriguing as it probes the reality of temptation, but the truth emerges. Whether or not we yield to temptation is our own responsibility. One of the interpretations of the story is that Yahweh is a God who punishes humankind when they are not obedient to God's instructions. When the story is interpreted in this way, God becomes the judge who issues edicts of punishment. Jesus countered this interpretation in his life and teaching that God is love. God is the source of forgiveness. This does not, however, eliminate the cornerstone truth that humanity suffers the consequences of their own behavior. No one is to blame but themselves. That is the cornerstone of the social order. In the last 6 weeks, we've identified 6 cornerstones of the Judeo-Christian culture, which has dominated the Western world for 3,000 years. We must remember these stories, not as eyewitness accounts of the historical events of creation, but cornerstones which teach us how to live our life together. In the next 6 weeks, we're going to consider cornerstones emerging from the stories of the 2 brothers, Cain and Abel, the story of the flood, and the story of building the tower. So we've considered these cornerstones, and this cornerstone raises a lot of questions throughout history and for us today. The first one is, what are the illustrations of human behavior, of human beings not accepting the consequences of their own behavior? Secondly, how does this interpretation change your understanding of God? And finally, is there any difference between, quote, the devil made me do it, and, quote, God made me do it? Think about these, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about them on Sunday.